Welcome back to William on Watch. Recently, ABC's Terry Moran conducted an interview with Donald Trump, and the result was so compelling and revealing that it deserves a very close examination. In this episode, we see the president elevating himself and his administration above the presumably co-equal judicial branch. It's worth noting that he has already done much the same with the also co-equal legislative branch by laying waste to agencies created and funded through acts of Congress, not the executive branch. And he's frequently bypassed lawmaking functions of the House and the Senate by employing executive actions predicated on bogus emergencies whenever and wherever convenient.
We have thousands of murderers that came in. They're going to murder people. They already have murdered people in our country.
Right, so
we have to get them out, and we have to get them out fast.
Really bad guys, but in our country, even bad guys get due process, right?
If people come into our country illegally, there's a different standard. These are illegal. They came in illegally.
But they get due process.
Well, they get a process where we have to get them out.
Okay, so here Trump is pretending to be stupid, which does not require much acting ability. He refuses to acknowledge that due process rights extend to migrants who have entered the U.S. illegally. Now, there are multiple court decisions dating back over a century indicating that all persons within the United States are entitled to due process rights, with the 1896 decision in Wong Wing versus United States being the landmark case finding specifically that due process rights are applicable in cases of immigration enforcement. So we're not talking about something theoretical or abstract. The Trump administration is straight up violating settled law.
All right, well, let me ask you about one man and one court order. Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's the Salvadoran man who crossed into this country illegally, but who is under a protective order that he not be sent back to El Salvador. Your government sent him back to El Salvador and acknowledged in court that was a mistake. And now the Supreme Court has upheld an order that you must return him facilitate his return to the United States. What are you doing to comply?
Well, the lawyer that said it was a mistake was here a long time, was not appointed by us, should not have said that, and just so you understand, the person that you're talking about, you know, you're making this person sound, this is a MS-13 gang member, a tough cookie, been in lots of skirmishes, beat the hell out of his wife, and the wife was petrified to even talk about him, okay? This is not an innocent, wonderful gentleman from Maryland.
I'm not saying he's a good guy. It's about the rule of law. The order from the Supreme Court stands, sir.
He came into our country illegally.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
And if he were the gentleman that you say he is, I would do that.
But the court has ordered you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
Here, Trump says it's not his decision as to whether or not the administration facilitates the return of Garcia. But of course it is. He's the president. And then he adds a statement of particular importance. Quote, "We have lawyers who don't want to do it." Now that's an admission that the administration's failure to comply with a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling is simply because they don't want to comply. Basically telling the Supreme Court to F off. That, I think, is huge, and might amount to a declaration by the president that the executive branch is superior to the judicial branch, that the Trump administration is now untethered from the Constitution. In the next clip, Trump again dismisses the power of the judiciary after being reminded by Terry Moran that it's the Supreme Court that interprets the law, not the president or his lawyers. By the way, you are the sponsor of today's video, so as we go into clip number 3, please take a sec to hit the like and subscribe buttons.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I were the president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what the law is.
Listen, I was elected to take care of a problem. It was a unforced error that was made by a very incompetent man, a man that turned out to be incompetent, that you always said was wonderful, a great genius, right? And now you find out, all of the media now, they're saying what a mistake they made. A man who was grossly incompetent allowed us to have open borders where millions of people flowed in. I campaigned on that issue. I wouldn't say it was my number one issue, but it was pretty close.
Right up there.
I campaigned on that issue. I've done an amazing job. I have closed borders. He said you couldn't do it. You wouldn't be able to do it. It would never happen. Well, it happened.
So Trump is basically saying that his wishes are superior to rulings of the high court. He prattles on about campaign promises as if they carry more weight than any silly due process rights. Whenever pressed about the illegality of deportations without due process, Trump very consistently suggests that removing illegal migrants is of such importance that bothersome constitutional requirements, by comparison, are simply irrelevant. I assume he feels the same about his attempts to crush law firms he's identified as his personal enemies using executive actions. He has unconstitutionally stripped them of security clearances, made them ineligible for federal contracts, and various other punishments. Make no mistake, these are unrestrained, bold abuses of power. Many of these executive orders have been held to be unconstitutional by the courts. But a substantial number of Trump's targets, such as Skadden Arps, have settled with the administration rather than fight for their constitutionally guaranteed rights. And others, incredibly, sought deals with the administration preemptively, some having received warnings from the White House that they could be next on the hit list. Reportedly, law firms named in the executive actions were at risk of a mass exodus of clients who feared the firms would be unable to represent them if they couldn't even gain access to federal buildings. So the executive actions likely created an existential threat to the firms, who then reacted pragmatically. But I would certainly not be inclined to retain any firm that won't even defend itself. Let's take a look at a few examples of firms that came under attack by the Trump administration. Covington and Burling was targeted because the firm represented former special counsel Jack Smith, who led the DOJ prosecutions of Donald Trump. Trump claimed that they had weaponized the judicial process against him. To their credit, Covington and Burling fought back in court. Several other prominent firms have similarly stood up for their rights and for the Constitution, including Perkins Coie, Sussman Godfrey, Jenner & Block, and WilmerHale. They're all to be commended. When they stand up for their rights, they, by extension and by establishing precedent, defend our constitutional rights as well. In the case of Perkins Coie, Judge Howell said, quote, "No American president has ever before issued executive orders like the one at issue," end quote, and ruled that the executive order against the firm was unconstitutional, violating the First Amendment and unlawful retaliation against protected speech and association, and also referenced the Fifth Amendment, due process rights, and the Sixth Amendment, right to counsel. She characterized the executive order as a, quote, "blunt exercise of power and retribution." In the case of Sussman Godfrey, Trump's executive order accused the firm of engaging in activities detrimental to U.S. interests, specifically citing its representation of Dominion voting systems in a defamation suit against Fox News related to false claims the network made about the 2020 presidential election. The executive order aimed to suspend the firm's security clearances, restrict access to federal buildings, and direct federal agencies to review and potentially terminate contracts with the firm. The judge in the case referred to the executive action as a, quote, "shocking abuse of power," end quote. And finally, a coalition of 20 state attorneys general issued an open letter stating that the executive orders offend basic principles of due process and undermine the rule of law principles. I could go on and on describing executive orders that amount to egregious constitutional violations, but you get the idea. I've placed a link in the description below to a 60 Minutes video providing greater detail on Trump's shakedown of the law firms that are on his enemies list. These willful violations of due process, unconstitutional abuses of power, and the usurpation by the Trump administration of the powers relegated only to Congress, along with so many other Trump atrocities, put on full display Trump's complete disdain for the United States Constitution, and beg the question of whether we're witnessing the demise by 1,000 cuts of our constitutional republic. Despite often being described as unserious, to me, Trump is every bit as serious as a 3-year-old playing with a loaded gun. What are your thoughts? In the next episode, we dive deeper into the ABC interview and take a close look at a fraudulent photograph that was first posted on the internet, where else? On Trump's own social media accounts. Don't miss that one, because we're going to connect the dots between the obviously faked photo and Trump's creepy history of media deception. Until next time, fair winds and keep a close watch.